Welcome to another episode of Community Chat. My name is Kevin Tocci and I will serve as your host for this program. We use this program as a way to share information, have discussions, whether it's on the community level, things happening in departments. It could be something that's happening regionally. Today we are very fortunate to be able to sit down and have a conversation with the Abington Fire Chief, John Nuttall. He is our guest. Chief, welcome formally to Community Chat.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, and it's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you for hosting this.
This is the first time you and I sat down. I want to say that I had a chance to talk with yourself and Derek Hamadi in your office. We did a shoot once.
Correct. At that point, I think we were talking about the needs of the Abington Fire Department for trying to get a new fire station. I know that's still ongoing. There's a lot of work that's gone into that. There's a good plan. That plan really has evolved several times from the initial phases of the feasibility study to now include a different location. Originally it was proposed possibly across the street on Glenamich Way. That is now changed to a possible location on Central Street to be co-located with the Abington DPW, who also needs a facility. So we're trying to do some plans of putting it at the current location where the Abington DPW is on Central Street, which is also next to the police station, which would be a true municipal fire safety and municipal location for all of those services, which would be a lot better. I think it would be cheaper in the long run to do, obviously including a DPW, a different department is more expensive than just fire, but both of these departments need new facilities, and if we were able to do it together, I think in the long term it would actually be cheaper. I'm not going to be here to see that because the other purpose of this interview is this is my retirement. I'm actually literally counting down the hours as we go. But I am very proud that we're able to get that ball rolling towards looking at the needs of the Abington Fire Department, the fact that we've greatly outgrown that fire station, both fire stations, and that project really has grown and morphed into including a community possible community project with the DPW, and we'll see where that goes. I've really already kind of handed that project off, both to firefighter Derek Hamadi and to, some of the other members on that committee, as well as John Stone with the DPW, to kind of let them hopefully carry that through to the finish line.
Let's talk a little bit about John Nuttall. Let's start with how many years have you been in the fire service and specifically here in Abington?
Sure. My entire career has been in Abington with the fire department. I started in January of 1990 when I was 21 years old. I literally grew up, my entire adult life has been with the town of Abington, the Abington Fire Department. So I'm on my 33rd year with the Abington Fire Department. The last roughly 13 years as your fire chief. That was in November of 2010. I was appointed as fire chief. And it's been a fascinating career. Firefighting, I could talk the entire, however length of time you have on here, just firefighting is a fascinating career. That's one of the, I think, the things that really drew me to it. There are so many different facets of firefighting. You get into building construction, you get into fire behavior, fire science, the way things burn, they burn differently. Fireground hydraulics, which is how we move water through the fire hoses, literally from the hydrant to the pump to the attack line, depending if you're going up a ladder, like for a ladder pipe, or if you're going in upper floors or down in the basement. It depends on what pressure you want to have on that. It depends on what nozzle. It depends on how many gallons per minute you want to use it at any time, depending on what's burning. There is so much science in this job. Then you get into, with paramedicine, you get into the anatomy of the human body, the pharmacology portion of that. I'm not a paramedic. I'm one of the only non-paramedics in the Abington Fire Department, but I support our paramedics 100%. My career went more towards management than paramedicine at that divide, but it's still fascinating. And then you get into fire codes, laws, and there is so much to learn with this career. Technical rescue. I could go on all day on that, but I won't. But that's really what drew me, I think, to this career.
Really?
Yeah.
That was the primary thing. I mean, myself, just a small disclaimer, when it comes to municipalities and all the departments, I'm a fan of all the departments, but I have family that are in the fire service. I've had a grandfather, an uncle. I have cousins who are in the fire service, and I hear stories and have discussions with what they have gone through. And so to them, it was it was kind of the family calling, So that was the primary. There wasn't any other reason. Was there somewhere else you were leaning, that maybe you might have been a scientist or something else that you thought about doing? And he's like, maybe the fire services. You saying that's the primary reason?
I actually wanted to be an astronaut, and then I realized it's all math. So I quickly dispelled that. Once I became fire chief, guess what? It's all math, but I learned to do with that. It's all budgeting. I'm the first firefighter in my family, but I'm not the last. My oldest son is a firefighter paramedic in the town of Canton right now, and I'm very proud of him. I grew up really watching Emergency. A lot of people, I think, my age, we grew up,
Yep.
early 1970s watching Emergency. And that was, those of you who have seen the TV show Emergency, that really also introduced paramedicine to the world, I think, as well as the fire portions. The paramedic parts back then were kind of boring, but the fires were cool. But then you learn to understand the paramedicine part as you get older. Yeah, we all kind of played firefighter somewhat, and after, one of the first main jobs I had after high school was actually with a fire extinguisher company. I did that for like 3 or 4 years prior to being hired by Abington. So really almost my entire life has kind of revolved around this. One of the other things, and when I was in, I think it was junior high, I think it was 8th grade, right at the Frollo, one of my students in one of my homeroom classes, Eric Smith, those that you remember back, this is about 1980, he was one of my classmates. Eric unfortunately passed away. I believe he had a congenital heart defect, and he ended up in the classroom going down, and I remember we were there, and the fire department showed up. The EMTs at the time that showed up ultimately ended up being my co-workers several years, 10 years later. I didn't know that. I remembered feeling helpless, not knowing what to do at a young age. My teacher at the time, there was one of my other classmates, Paul Orcutt, who was, I think, an Eagle Scout at the time, or Boy Scout. They were rendering care as best they could for him, and that continued all the way out. I remember that helpless feeling back in junior high, and that really had a bearing on, I always wanted to try to be prepared. I became an EMT prior to being on the fire department, really because I wanted to know the knowledge for hiking up in the White Mountains and like that. And just one thing kind of just led down this career path. So that's a long answer to how I really became interested in, and just really trying to help people, trying to help the community, help other people. Firefighting, certainly, between watching Emergency, and we all had the big gym toys and like that back then. It was all firefighters. This was way before Star Wars back then, but it just really kind of got into my DNA, I think, wanting to help people, and the science behind how fires work, and how you kind of organize, you make order from chaos is really what this whole career is about, trying to help people.
Let's talk about your 30 plus years, 3 decades plus in the fire service. How has the fire service changed during your time in the service?
Excellent question, Kevin. I mean, the fire service, we grow really with what's going on in society around us. We're having a massive growth right now with the advent of the battery cars, the solar panels, the lithium battery storage. Everywhere batteries, obviously, right now is the way to go. Fire service-wise, that's trending the changes, and we're trying to keep up with that. Firefighting foams we cannot really use anymore because of the PFAS. That's really hampered what we can do. That's become a very expensive proposition. We're trying to find new foams for that. We really don't want to use that unless it's absolute life safety. So that's a change. But getting back, just with my career beginning in January 1990, the town of Abington has changed incredibly drastically since that time. And I think the best way to illustrate that is if you look at what the town of Abington did not have in January of 1990 when I started. We did not have Walmart, Stop and Shop, Lowe's, Target. We did not have any of the large apartment complexes, the Woodlands, the Gables up on North Quincy Street, Forsyth Drive, Stewart Drive right up the street here. We didn't have the senior center. We didn't have the new high school, town hall, library, police station. The town has grown immensely. We did have New England Art. That was one of the largest employers in town. Abington Incorporated, 200 Whale Street, the other large brick building near the Depot restaurant. That was still, they made different industrial textile type things. That was still a large company there. We didn't have the commuter rail in town. Those tracks were, for the most part, vacant. They were unoccupied. The town has grown immensely. So with all of that growth now in town that we have, the call volumes go up. The calls certainly become more complicated. We did not have paramedicine back then. We had EMTs. We did not have most of the heavy rescue equipment that we have. Cars were different. We didn't have as many, we now have airbags on all the corner posts and, not just on the steering wheel. And even back then they were somewhat new. So we have to know how to extricate people from much more complicated vehicles. The town itself of Abington has changed. So we changed, really geared up for the needs of Abington. If we were Cambridge and we had all kinds of biolabs, we'd have certain training equipment for that. Or if we were a rural farm community, we'd have training for that. We grow really specifically for what the needs of Abington are. I don't want to say that we have high rises. We don't. We have 4-story buildings, all apartment buildings for the most part. We have special packs for if we have fires up in the upper floors of those apartment buildings, because we may not run a fire hose from the engine all the way up to an apartment burning there. We have special hose packs that will tie in separately. That's specific for Abington. We didn't really have that when we first started. So,
let's talk about your early years or your time as a firefighter before you climbed the ladder to become chief. Memorable calls, and whether it was treacherous moments to maybe some funny stories or serious things, teachable moments. Folks may or may not realize it, but when it comes to firefighting, it isn't necessarily rescuing a cat out of the tree or necessarily going there because there's a kitchen fire. The fire department can be called for so many different reasons across the board.
Boy, there's so many things I can answer on this one. I'm gonna, for a number of reasons, I'm not going to say most of them just because I don't want to. But I'll answer your question.
Okay.
We do see a lot of things. There's no question. It's a fascinating career, and it's the full spectrum. There's the funny calls where, we go to the cellar. This is years ago, and there's a drunk person at the cellar. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. It's closing time, and we're called there in the ambulance, and different owner at the time, whatever, different crowd. I don't think there's a sober place in the place. Well, somebody passed out, and they're insisting we do CPR on them. Well, there's no reason to, and we get out of that unscathed, fortunately. Other times, just dealing with, there's certainly the human element of what we do. We see people sometimes at their best and their worst, and we understand that. Usually when you're calling the fire department, you're calling 911, usually it's your worst time. We understand that. The worst time for one person may be they can't open their car door. That may be the worst day of their life. The worst time for another person may be something much, much more extreme. It runs the spectrum on that. So we try to understand that, okay, maybe it's a relatively minor thing, but for them it's a main thing. We understand that. Fires, certainly, we've had our share of large fires in this town. The small fires are some of the more dangerous ones because we've done our job. We've actually prevented it, we've mitigated that situation. We've extinguished it while it was still small. But when you get a fire in a basement or in an attic, and you're not really seeing it from the outside, you're not really seeing as much smoke, a little bit of smoke. The amount of heat and zero visibility and just belongings falling down and trapping us while we're trying to put that fire out. From the outside, that does not look like much, but when we're in that building, that is intense. So we've had many calls which really didn't make the news. People didn't see it, they didn't understand it's a big deal. But inside that structure, in the basement, the attic, or wherever it may be, we're doing our job, and it's pretty extreme. We actually just last night in Rockland, I was at a working fire in Rockland. They had an attic fire, same thing. I'm working right up to the very end. I'm not a coaster, but we've also had a very large conflagration fires. The largest fire I ever went to, I think it was in Brockton. It was the Spark Street fire. They had a large mill building going. This is about 1994, 95, I think. Chief Galligan, retired Brockton fire chief at the time, he was running it. I remember, it went up to, I think 8 or 9 alarms. At one point, he just called for 10 engines. He'll joke about that. He says, I don't know where I'm going to put them, but 10 sounds like a good number. And he just formed multiple concentric rings of apparatus around the initial fire building to contain it. And then a neighborhood around that, he had it in case it got out. I was just a firefighter then, but I learned his tactics a lot from that. I was living in Holbrook at the time, It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember driving to the fire because we sent an engine and a ladder over there. And when you get to Holbrook Square, you could literally read a newspaper in Holbrook Square from this fire, which was up in the that section of Brockton. That, I think, is the largest fire I've seen locally. You know, we've had fires fairly recently in Situate. They just had 3 or 4 houses go a couple of months ago. That was going rather large too, but this was different when it's a mill fire. You know, the Plymouth County Hospital in Hanson, that was large. We've had a large number of fires in the area. You know, that goes with the career. There's a tremendous amount of mutual aid and camaraderie. When I say camaraderie, what I mean really is we work extremely well together.
Indeed.
You know, both Plymouth, Norfolk counties together. We just automatically plug into each other. We just go. You know, it's a common training that we all have, and we take it seriously. And you know, we really have a good team going in this whole area.
Talk to me about the decision to become chief. What led to you saying, I want to be the head of this department, and I want to be someone who leads this group of individuals, whether it's in good times or when there's a crisis?
Good question. Well, the short answer is I did not want to be chief. I'll be honest. I enjoyed being captain. When I was 292, I was the captain of Group 2. That was one of the best parts of my career. Captain is you're in charge of your group. You know, you're still working the shift. You're first in on the line. You know, running the emergencies. I loved being captain. And most chiefs will tell you, I think when they were company officers, shift officers, they enjoyed that portion. We also were under extreme budget constraints. This is there's numerous times when the town had budget cuts. Just the economy was down. We understand it. The past fire chiefs, I don't envy what they had to go through. You know, the constant cutting of things because their budgets were being cut. Those were very difficult times. And my entire career was kind of under that. I was actually hired with the understanding I was probably going to be laid off in 1990. I never was laid off. I was fortunate, but right up until almost I became chief, we had that threat of the economy constantly cutting our department. And so I kind of, that was my experience. I was a union president at the time, a couple of times throughout my career, so I saw that side of it. I get heavily involved in the budget portion of it as a captain, and really through being union president, trying to work with the chief to find ways to really save jobs, to keep the mission of the fire department going is really what it comes down to. You know, to provide the services while we're still being cut. A lot of that was through attrition. So things were beginning to spiral. Station 2 was closed, the manpower had dropped. At some point you start getting into a spiral where you cannot get out of it. And that was the main reason I really studied to become chief, to try to find ways to solve these problems. At the time I was finishing up my master's program with public administration. I ended up going that route. I'd already had fire science degrees and management degrees that way. Because it was really about the budget. And I was trying to learn about municipal budgeting, find different ways to make these work, whether it be grants, changing ambulance revenues, changing our operations. That's really what led me to become chief. It was to try to solve the problems, to work to save the department, to be honest with you. I don't want to, that sounds egotistical. I don't mean it that way. This was all teamwork. But that was really the main reason. I wish I could have fixed the boat and jumped back into it as a captain, but you can't do that. So I decided to at least go for being chief. It was myself and another captain. We went for it. I became chief. The other deputy Belcher became the deputy. And we kind of just took off from there. The town at the time still had a hiring freeze. I think I was the first department head to request to break that hiring freeze, to begin hiring back, because the average age of the fire department when I became chief, I think it was about 55. We had an older department. We had a lot of people that were out on injury. We had a lot of positions lost that were not filled to attrition, and we had to break that spiral down. So the selectmen at the time, the town manager at the time, they allowed me to begin hiring a little bit, and we slowly built it back up. We diluted the workload out with some younger people, which that doesn't sound, that sounds awful, but there's a lot of lifting with this job. And as you go through a long career in firefighting, in emergency medicine, it takes a toll certainly on back injuries. We have a lot of back injuries, and just joint injuries, musculoskeletal injuries. Usually, we're lifting people. We're using heavy jaws of life. Firefighting is hard work. Using a fire hose, there's a lot of pressure behind that. So we kind of needed younger, stronger people to come in to dilute that workload, if you would. And that drastically decreased the injury rate that we had, and we really never stopped. We kept it going. We've reduced the average age of the fire department. Now I think we're in the low 30s. That keeps the enthusiasm going. Everybody's constantly learning. That, I think, was the main reason I became chief, to try to fix it. And it's been teamwork from everybody ever since then, from the town leaders, the finance committee, the selectmen, the union. And we've really just kept this whole place going.
Talk to me about serving in the role as chief, where you are, if it's a major incident where you are there at the command center, if in fact you need to call in mutual aid, it goes to multiple alarms. What is that like, taking the training that you have and being able to do that, and then also talking about the managerial side? Hey, we need to replace engine ... We need to make sure that we're updating this. Mm-hmm. Talk about the role of chief and some of those things.
So I think in general, the way to answer your question, Kevin, is the higher in rank you go in the fire service, and I think in a lot of industries, a lot of professions, the higher you go in rank, the more of a higher view of the entire scene you're getting. So when you're a firefighter, let's just assume it's a fire. When you're a firefighter at a building fire, your job may be either the pump operator, you're operating the ladder to vent a hole in the roof, or you're actually with the fire hose to put it out. Your focus on that entire scene is specifically really on your task, what you're doing. You're making sure everybody around you is safe, but you're focused on your task. That's your job. You've got one job, you do it. As you go up in rank, either lieutenant or a captain, we have captains, which does the same thing. You're now in charge of really what that task is, but also the people under you. That you maybe you're in charge of like 5 people. You're making sure that your group that you have is doing what you're supposed to do. As you go up to either deputy or chief, that position gets bigger. If you're the deputy or the chief, now you're showing up in, all right, I have multiple groups going, multiple captains running different groups, and I want to look at what all of the tasks are, as well as who else is covering the rest of the town. Do I have an engine available for mutual aid at the station? I'm kind of responsible for the overall scene of the fire, and as well as make sure the rest of the town's covered. I kind of can't do both, so I'm going to assign somebody to cover the town. I just want to know that's done, I don't have to worry about it. And then I'm going to kind of run the whole scene. Now, as the scenes become more complicated, there's many times where I will take either, it doesn't have to be a deputy chief. My captains, even firefighters, are capable of this, but it tends to be a higher ranking just because we have more experience. I'm going to want somebody inside for me. I'm going to have either a chief or deputy or a captain. I want somebody inside. And depending on the building, I may want somebody on floor 1. We call that division 1. Or floor 2, division 2. What are the conditions like in division 2? What are conditions like in the basement? What are conditions like in the back of the building? Now, when we look at a building, we'll go side A, B, C, D. Side A is usually front of the building where I'm facing, and then you go clockwise. Side B will be the left side, side C is the rear, side D is the right. I'm usually going to have a chief on side C, the back of the building, because nobody sees what's going on, and you can have fire blowing out the back. So I may say, command to the Charlie side. What are your conditions like there? So this is how we start taking a very disorganized scene and we start putting order into it. We'll geographically start breaking up the scene. If I have other tasks that have to be done, that'll be another alarm coming in. A typical alarm is usually 2 engines and an aerial. So for every alarm we're striking, we're getting 2 more engines and an aerial. We may not need 5 ladder trucks there, but I may need the crews to come in to do that work. A lot of times, especially with the very hot weather or cold weather or whatever, we're rotating crews more. So that's why you'll see we're at 4 alarms, we're only using 4 engines, and I get a parade of fire trucks parked up the street, but I'm using all the personnel because we're diluting the personnel because the initial companies that went in there, they're tired, they've used up all their air, they've got to come out, we want to rehab them for a bit, let them rest, let them cool down, get a new air pack, somebody else goes in. And firefighting is very labor-intensive work. We're not just going in spraying hoses. We have to pull the ceilings down. We have to pull the walls down. And the reason for that, it's not because we like to cause damage. We have to make sure the fire's not behind there and it's hidden going up into the structure, because we don't want to come back later when we find the fire's still going. That's why we're opening up. That's called overhaul. We may have to remove a mattress from it. That's incredibly labor intensive. You know how it is just moving a new mattress into your home? Imagine when that's on fire. It's not easy to do. So firefighting becomes very labor intensive. And I think we have changed our tactics in the last 10, certainly the last several years, where we're really cognizant we don't want to injure firefighters. An injured firefighter is a very expensive thing. Obviously, we don't want them hurt. There's no question. But when that firefighter is injured and they're out for long term, that's expensive monetarily, because we have to replace that position with somebody else on overtime.
Right.
So one of the ways, the tactics to avoid doing that is don't be afraid to call for help. Everybody's willing to come to your fire. And there's a cost to that as well for the other towns. There is another town sends an apparatus here, they're usually backfilling there, but that's short term as opposed to a long-term injury. And we all understand that with each other. So I think you're seeing the fire service, and certainly this area, the chiefs, we're not afraid to really start beefing up our run cards or our alarms to fires to really get more manpower than we ever really used to have to avoid that, because we've learned how really expensive it is when you don't want people getting injured anyway. Buildings are more complicated now. We're putting, I've seen that change in my career. Buildings are tighter. Most buildings now have the energy efficient windows, double pane glass. They're harder to break, but they also keep the building tight. So when you get a fire in there, the fire may be growing to more intensity. We're putting IKEA type furniture in there. I'm not picking on IKEA. I do woodworking, so that's a separate thing. But IKEA furniture, it's sawdust bound together with resins, and it burns differently from a solid wood piece of furniture. Sofas it's all plastics. When they burn, it can be like gasoline, to be honest with you.
Goodness.
So we're building tighter buildings, we're putting more flammable things in them, we're getting more BTUs. And the higher BTUs, British thermal units, that changes how we fight the fire. We need more water to absorb those BTUs because we're putting more flammable things in them. And the structures themselves, they're not built with solid 2x4 construction like they used to be. Some of them still are, but now we're seeing much more lightweight construction. We're making lightweight I-beams out of particle board and plywood, which is sawdust tied together with resins and glue, and they burn very quickly. So what used to take a solid 2x8 floor joist to burn through, or maybe it would take 30 to 45 minutes, that fire is burning through in 5 minutes now, just about the time the firefighters are showing up on scene and they may be walking on that floor, as well as the roof rafters. The buildings are much more dangerous than they used to be. All of these changes I've seen throughout my career change how our tactics go. So we're a little bit more defensive. We're putting more solar panels on roofs. That changes. We can't just cut a hole in the roof now. We may have to make a gable cut, and that may draw the fire out. And I'm not saying don't have a solar panel, I'm not saying that, but it changes our tactics. We're trying to safely fight fires when these buildings burn.
What was the decision like to say, I want to call it a career after 30 plus years? What was that like, and when did it finally form on your lips going, I'm going to retire?
Good question. And it's very bittersweet. I am retiring in just days from when this is being taped, and it's very bittersweet. I love my career. I want to still get out while I still love it. And I've had other chiefs, that have retired say, you just know when it's time. And I think that's not just firefighting. I think that's probably any career. You just know. And I'm burning out, and I can feel it. It's been a long time, change. I know there's more budget issues coming eventually, that the economy at some point, it's going to start to go back down again. And none of us can stop that. I've been through several of those in my career. I don't think I have it in me to go through another one. A lot of the changes coming on with technology and all that, I'm seeing a lot of my younger firefighters, my younger officers, they're way ahead of me on some of the technology on that. And I respect that. I don't want to get in their way because I'm still kind of thinking some of the older ways when I started. And I've been doing this my entire life. So I want to start branching out and maybe doing some other things. You also see a lot of bad things in your career, and that starts to weigh on you, to be honest with you, and I'm aware of it, so, we certainly see our share of tragedies as well. And when you live and work in the same town, you really don't get away from that. And it just, all of these things just kind of start, how many bricks can you carry before the load's starting to get heavy? And I don't want to wait until it gets so heavy that it breaks you, because I think I've seen that with some people too. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but you just kind of know, I'm not thrilled with the direction the country's going, and that has a direct impact on what we do specifically here at our department here. I'm not going to go deep into that at all, but it's there. The last couple of years, certainly going through COVID and like that, that really changed a lot of things too, I think, in different ways. Just it kind of burns you out a little bit.
Let's kind of talk, if we could touch upon it. What was it like? I mean, you were a chief through a pandemic.
Yep.
How did that change your department's approach to handling things? Maybe folks don't realize how difficult it made your department's job to do what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Great question. We actually had a meeting with, a couple of meetings with chiefs just over the last week, and we were talking about this as well. COVID affected all of us. The pandemic affected all of us in multiple ways. Number one's preventing people from gathering. That really hurt people, going to Zoom meetings constantly, not being able to congregate. Thank God we're over that, but that started burning people out, Zoom meetings are not the same thing as having a meeting together for a number of reasons, whether it's in school or whether it's a meeting here or a sales thing. You can't talk off the record when you're being recorded. It just doesn't happen. So that was missing. These are some of the after effects from COVID. Really the main impact of the Abington Fire Department dealing with COVID, going through the recommendations that were changing literally by the hour on this. We have incredible people in the Abington Fire Department. And two of my EMS coordinators, Justin Silva and Adam Levine, at the time that we're doing that, I actually reassigned them from their shift to days to keep up with this because, going through decontamination procedures, the personal protection, PPE requirements, these were literally changing by the hour on some days, and we'd get all geared up and then they'd change it again, what we're supposed to do. I really needed them. I really kind of delegated that to them. That's all they focused on. And they were extremely good at it. And they focused on really assisting the other groups within the department, literally showing up, helping them to decon, helping them. There was a lot of unknowns with this initially. It changed our protocols with how we respond to all calls, not just medicals. We really became defensive. We basically shuttered both stations. We didn't allow the public in. We did this everywhere, as you know. I think most industries did it, which we don't like doing because we try to be open. We want to, interact with the community. But during that time, we became very defensive. That affected mutual aid in the whole area, not just Abington. Mutual aid companies now, if I had an engine coming to cover Abington, they were staying in their trucks. They weren't coming in as much, and that was mutual. That was both the receiving department and the offering department for mutual aid. We were both doing that for a while. It just changed everything. We got through it. Obviously the fear. I think there's a lot of fear with people. We were very strong trying to get the vaccines for people that wanted it. We're a huge advocate, Whitman next door, Rockland, Abington. We had a really good testing center going on that we were providing, the vaccine centers that we were doing for those that wanted it. It changed for me when they started mandating things. I fought extremely hard for people that wanted the vaccine. I actually had a press conference pretty much against the governor because we were trying to get the vaccines to let us go directly to people's homes to give it instead of going to Gillette Stadium or Fenway.
I remember that.
If you have somebody in their 80s and they don't drive, and they honestly, they literally did not want to leave their homes just because of fear. They don't want to go out and be possibly contaminated with something. They're not going to do that, and we understood that. And so we tried to just let us have, Abington's not a huge, give us several hundred doses of the vaccine. We'll literally go to their home and give it to them if they want it. And that's not what the state went a different way, and they had these massive centers to do it. That's what they chose to do. I didn't agree with that. We were vocal about it. We got nowhere. And, then we kind of get out of the vaccine thing after that. When they started mandating things, and unfortunately Abington was not under one of those mandates, I was not in favor of that. And I'm not going to go deep on that, but if somebody wants it, we'll be the first one to get it for you. If somebody does not want it, I don't really want to see that forced on somebody that did not want that. I was not comfortable with that. I'm still not comfortable with that. It's everybody's choice, but that changed, I think, a lot of things too. That was one of the first major hurdles that I'm like, you know what, I think I'm kind of getting tired of this. I'll be honest with you. And I'll let history decide, the viewers can decide. Everybody's got their opinion on this, I understand that. But that affects drastically how we operate. So at that point, and then the CARES Act funds were drying up. We weren't getting reimbursed for overtime if we're trying to have some of these clinics and like that. And I said, this is beginning to be mission creep. We got to go back to being firefighters and EMS because we're starting to do things that, it's mission creep, to be honest with you. I don't have it in the budget anymore. It's taking time. It's starting to wear in my personnel. So we altered course to go back to what we really were charged to do, to go back to firefighting, EMS, and fire prevention and all that. And we kind of got away from the whole industry at that point. It was almost becoming a pharmaceutical industry. We got away from that. We kind of let other people take care of that at that point.
What will you miss about the fire service, whether it was your earlier days as a firefighter, a captain, as a chief? What will you miss about the fire service?
I'm going to miss the people. I mean, the people I work with, obviously, I'm absolutely going to miss that. We're more like a family. Fire service is a unique occupation, a unique profession, because you're literally living with people. You're in the fire station for 24 hours at a time. You're literally living with these people. You're having meals with them. Not so much as chief. We tend to back away from that somewhat, but that's what I miss about being a captain. You're with them, and you're also with somebody. You can have a 35-year career easily. You're with people. Sometimes you see your coworkers more than your spouse. I'm not kidding. That actually can happen. And it really becomes like a family. It's a unique. The only other occupations like that may be the maritime industry, if you're on a ship like that, or some of the military service. We're a unique industry where you spend that much time with people, and you have bonds. Obviously, I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss. I don't want to call it excitement of going to some of the calls, but really it is. It's a fascination. It's fascinating when you see how the fires go out, and then afterwards you go and you try to piece back how the fire began. You try to find the point of origin, the cause of the fire. There's a lot of detective work and science with that. It's fascinating, to be honest with you. You're trying to find, how did this fire start? Where did it start? What could have done it? I'm going to miss that because it's a challenge. That's fascinating. Seeing how buildings are built, the sprinkler systems, the fire prevention systems, all of that stuff. I'm going to miss that. I'm a geek when it comes to building construction in the fire suppression systems and like that. The engineering that goes into that. It really is fascinating to see how a building is put together. I'm going to miss all of that. Seeing it. There's no question. Certainly, interacting with the people. Trying to help them out, as well as just people coming in to talk to them like that. I will definitely miss that. There's no question. I'm not going to miss the budget. I think we're pretty good at the budget, to be honest with you. It becomes an art form with the budget. You just, it's part of the job. The budget really is what keeps the whole department going. All the department heads, my colleagues do the same thing. You asked prior to this, am I going to miss town meeting? I enjoyed town meetings, actually. I always tried to be prepared for it. I still cannot believe we got the tower truck. Back in 2014-15, when I presented to the town and I requested $1.2 million to replace the ladder truck that had really become unrepairable, I was prepared. I expected a fight, and that's the correct forum for that fight. That's an extremely expensive piece of apparatus, and I expected a challenge on that. And I was ready for it. And when I spoke up, I walked up to the microphone. I'm ready for people to question that. There was nobody, crickets, and I literally backed away from the microphone, and they voted it. I'm still amazed by that, and I still want to thank the Abington voters and residents for that. That's an incredible piece of apparatus that we got, and it's yours, and thank you for that, as well as all of the other purchases that we've done. I was very fortunate that in my tenure as the fire chief, and this is not me, a lot of it was just luck and the great teamwork that we have both town-wide, the town manager, the selectmen, the finance committee, my offices, my department, the Abington Firefighters Union. We all work together to kind of have almost the golden years of just the economy kind of being calm and allowing us to have rapid growth and get caught up from the attrition that we had years ago. So I'm very fortunate for that. And it was certainly teamwork from everybody. So I'm going to miss that.
What are your hopes for the Abington Fire Department moving forward without Chief Nuttall?
They're more than capable. I just fulfilled the role as a fire chief. There are many chiefs prior to me. There'll be many chiefs after me. Every orchestra needs a conductor. That's really what we are. Everybody's doing their job. They do it extremely well. The chief just kind of coordinates it, to be honest with you. I can't have an orchestra without other players, or a band leader without everybody doing that, or a coach without your team. That's what the role of the chief is. So that they're in very well capable hands going forward. I think they'll just continue where they are. I wish them continued luck, continued health, continued growth. Hopefully they can get the fire station. They certainly need it. There's no question. That's for their safety as well.
Yeah, talk about that. If you talk about the importance of having that, I know you had the regular meetings, and we've done programs to illustrate some of the issues with the current firehouses. Talk about that at length, if you will.
Again, we've done many shows on this, but I'll try to summarize it briefly for you. We've outgrown the fire stations in Abington. There's no question. They're too small. They're dangerously too small for the apparatus. You literally cannot get between apparatus to apparatus. We're literally inches bumper to bumper at both stations. It affects the apparatus that we can purchase. Apparatus is changing drastically with just all new regulations. I'm really concerned about that because we have certain lengths and heights and widths of the apparatus that we cannot exceed to fit in those bays. You know, in cleaning out my office the other day, you know, I removed my office. You've seen it was like a museum. That's all back at my house now. My personal things, you know, different pictures off the wall and like that. You know, I was amazed to see that even though I repainted that office about 13 years ago, and we keep everything clean, even removing the portraits from my wall like that, there's diesel smoke staining behind that. It's still getting through the Plymouth vent system. And we're very careful about that. We put a lot of rules out there not to start the saws in the building like that because it's the air that we're breathing. My office walls, now that they're bare, are stained from all that, and that's fairly new. That's recent. We really need to separate the living quarters from everybody from the apparatus bays, and we can't do that the way the building's built. Right? It's physically impossible. The new stations, there's a hot zone, a warm zone, and a cold zone. You keep those separate. It's pretty dramatic to actually see that right now in my office. You're going to see the smoke staining from the diesel particulates all over the walls that were painted not that long ago. We're still getting that. That means we're breathing that in. And both myself and my secretary, when we were looking at that, it's very sobering because she's working there too. We're breathing all of this stuff in. The firefighters are there 24 hours a day. We're there, 40 hours a week, longer typically for myself, but we're breathing this stuff in. That's a safety concern, to be honest with you. So hopefully they can move forward and get a new station that fits the needs of Abington. It's large enough. It gives them enough personal space. Again, we have everybody at that station sharing one bathroom. We take turns with it, but
right.
We've got a multitude of men and women working at the Abington Fire Department at both stations sharing. We're a family, but we're not that close. And they shouldn't have to be expected to be that close,
All right, so here's the all-important question is without the dress whites and the badge, what does Citizen John Nuttall, what are you gonna go do in your free time?
Good question. I need to begin to decompress from this. I've been, and even right now, I've got my radio over there, you saw it.
Yep.
I'm still on, and I've been on for really 33 years, certainly the last 13 years as the chief. I don't relax. The people I work with joke about that. I think some of them have never seen me relaxed, and it's my DNA, so I'm going to try to release the grip on some of that things, on some of trying to, be in control of bad situations like that. That's going to take a little time. I'm taking a cross-country trip solo shortly after I retire, just to kind of try to decompress. I don't have another job lined up. Most fire chiefs, as soon as you retire, they go into a whole nother career. I didn't want to do that. To me, that's not retirement. Although if I'm not one to sit still and do nothing, so I'll probably end up doing something, but it will probably be much less stress. I have a lot of hobbies. I do woodworking, different things. I do a lot of reading. I have a lot of unique interests that I won't even get into that I always enjoy learning new things. And now that I can kind of put this away and not worry about what truck is down for the day, what the budget number is, what else is burning, what's going on in the other towns it's burning, because I'm always listening. With all of that being gone, which is a massive distraction from life, is even though you enjoy it, it really takes a lot of your time. I'm hoping just to find myself again and go back to some of the interests that I've always had that I really had to put aside to focus solely on what I've been doing for the last 13 years as chief.
Anything we haven't touched upon during your time as chief, or anything you want to say in closing as we wrap up our program here?
I think I'd like to thank you again for doing this, and really thank the whole community. Lifelong Abington, resident, except for a few years when we first got married. I lived in Holbrook, then we moved back. I want to thank the Abington residents, the Abington taxpayers, certainly the Abington town employees that I work with, town managers, selectmen, FinCom, all my other department heads. We've got a very close working relationship. We work very close with the other departments in this town, more than most other towns do, I think. We really do have a great working relationship. Obviously, the men and women of the Abington Fire Department, I can't thank you enough for that. I'm not going to get emotional on this. You're getting me, but you're going to be missed. And you mean more to me than you understand. And I tend to be quiet and stoic, and I know that, but you really are like a family, and I'm going to miss you. So thank you.
Chief, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service to the community of Abington. And we want to thank you for tuning into programs like this. Until our next conversation here on Community Chat, please be safe and have a good day.